Hello, good day everyone. Welcome to my class. And for today, we're going to tackle about the structures of poetry. But before that, let us define poetry. Poetry is a type of literature based on the interplay of words and rhythm. It often employs rhyme and meter, a set of rules governing the number and arrangement of syllables in each line. In poetry, words are strung together to form sounds, images, and ideas that might too complex or abstract to describe directly. Poetry was once written according to fairly strict rules of meter and rhyme, and each culture had its own rules. For example, Anglo-Saxon poets had their own rhyme schemes and meters, while Greek poets and Arabic poets had others. Although these classical forms are still widely used today, modern poets frequently do away with rules altogether. Their poems generally do not rhyme and do not fit in any particular meter. These poems, however, still have a rhythmic quality and seek to create beauty through their words. Example number 1. Of all creatures that breathe and move upon the earth, nothing is bred that is weaker than man. The Odyssey by Homer. The Greek poet Homer wrote some of the ancient world's most famous literature. He wrote in a style called epic poetry, which deals with gods, heroes, monsters, and other large-scale epic themes. Homer's long poems tell stories of Greek heroes like Achilles and Odysseus and have inspired countless generations of poets, novelists, and philosophers alike. Example number 2. Poetry gives powerful insight into the cultures that create it. Because of this fantasy and science fiction, authors often create poetry for their invented cultures. According to J.R.R. or John Ronald Reuel, Tolkien famously wrote different kinds of poetry for elves, dwarfs, hobbits, and humans, and the rhythms and subject matter of their poetry was supposed to show how these races differed from one another. In a more humorous vein, many Star Trek fans have taken to writing love poetry in the invented Klingon language. So now, let's proceed to structures of poetry. We have stanza, rhyme, meter, and line break. Let's focus with this one. Today is Your Luck by Bruce Lansky. Stanza is a group of lines in a poem. It is often called a verse. Today on your birthday, consider your luck. You could have been born as a pig, cow, or duck. You could have been born crying oink, quack, or moo. You're lucky you didn't wind up in the zoo. We have two stanzas, the stanza 1 and the stanza 2. Next we have rhyme. Rhyme is a pattern of words that contain similar sounds. Let us read again. Today on your birthday, consider your luck. You could have been born as a pig, cow, or duck. As you can see on the first stanza, we have two rhyming words, luck and duck. And on the second stanza, you could have been born crying oink, quack, or moo. You're lucky you didn't wind up in the zoo. We have moo and zoo. So, this is rhyme. Rhyme is a pattern of words that contain similar sounds. Next, we have meter. Meter is rhythmic structure of poems. Sometimes you can feel the meter rhythm by tapping for each syllable. Today on your birthday, consider your luck. You could have been born as a pig, cow, or duck. You could have been born crying oink, quack, or moo. You're lucky you didn't wind up in the zoo. Meter. Meter is a rhythmic structure of a poem. Sometimes you can feel the meter of rhythm by tapping for each syllable. Now we have line break. A line break is where a line of poetry ends. It causes the reader to pause and will determine how the poem is written. Today is Your Luck by Bruce Lansky. Today on your birthday, consider your luck. You could have been born as a pig, cow, or duck. Line breaks come at the end of each line of the poem. You could have been born crying oink, quack, or moo. You're lucky you didn't wind up in the zoo. This is also a good time to point out commas, periods, hyphens, and etc. It will show how to read the poem. So now, again, the structure of poetry: stanza, rhyme, meter, and line break. Stanza is a group of lines in a poem. It is often called a verse. Rhyme is a pattern of words that contain similar sounds. Meter is the rhythmic structure of a poem. Sometimes you can feel the meter rhythm by tapping for each syllable. Line break is where a line of poetry ends. It causes the reader to pause and will determine how the poem is written. So now, here is the structure of poetry. The structure, the poetry, forms, and elements. Now we have examples of poetry in literature. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. Trees by Joyce Kilmer. This is an excerpt from Joyce Kilmer's famous short poem. The poem employs a fairly standard rhyme scheme: A, A, B. Lines 1 and 2 rhymes together and lines 3 and 4 rhymes together, and a meter called lambic tetrameter, which is commonly employed in children's rhymes. Example number 2. I saw the best minds of generation destroyed by madness, starving hysterically naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix, angel-headed hipsters burning for ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the missionary night, who, poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking. Howl by Allen Ginsberg. These are the first few lines of Poe, one of the most famous examples of modern three-verse poetry. It has no rhyme and no particular meter, but its words still have a distinct rhythmic quality, and the line breaks encapsulate the meaning of the poem. Notice how the last word of each line contributes to the imagery of a corrupt, ravaged city, madness, smoking, with no exception. Heavenly, this powerful juxtaposition goes to the heart of Ginsberg's intent in writing the poem. Though what that intent is, you'll have to decide for yourself. Example number 3. In the twilight rain, this brilliant hued hibiscus, a lovely sunset. This poem by the Japanese poet Basho is a haiku. This highly influential Japanese style has no rhymes, but it does not have very specific meter. 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the second line, and 5 in the third line. Now we have examples of poetry in popular culture. Example number 1. This is Gil Scott-Heron, Save the Children. Rapping originated as a kind of performance poetry. In the 1960s and 70s, spoken word artists like Gil Scott-Heron began performing their poems over live or synthesized drum beats, a practice that sparked of all the modern hip-hop. Even earlier, the best poets of 1950s sometimes employed drums in their readings. Example number 2. Beowulf. Some of the most famous historical poems have been turned into movies or inspired episodes of television shows. Beowulf, for example, is an Anglo-Saxon epic poem that has spawned at least 8 film adaptations. Most recently, a 2000 animated film starring Angelina Jolie and Anthony Hopkins, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, has also inspired many pop culture spin-offs with its famous line, Nevermore. So now, what is the importance of poetry? Poetry is probably the oldest form of literature and probably predates the origin of writing itself. The oldest written manuscripts we have are poems, mostly epic poems telling the stories of ancient mythology. Examples include the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Vedas, sacred text of Hinduism. This style of writing may have developed to help people memorize long chains of information and the days before writing. Rhythm and rhyme can make the text more memorable and thus easier to preserve for culture that do not have a written language. Poetry can be written all the same purposes as any other kind of literature: beauty, humor, storytelling, political message, and many more. So that is poetry. Thank you for your time and thank you for listening for today. On the next discussion, we will tackle more about poetry. See you next time.